Hello and welcome to another Wednesday's Serial. I am here to talk to you about Matt Fraction's fantastical run. This is an interesting bit. I'm just going to warn you up front. I'm just going to go through it, so if you're worried about it being spoiled, don't be here. So it all begins in this cool Fantastic Four issue number 1 of his run. They did something here that I wish Marvel did with runs when they're going to have set creators for a while, is they give the volume to those creators and they move to another volume. I think that's how they should be doing things. It just makes more sense. And then having these things where they give 2 volumes to like a creator, like when Mark Waid was on Daredevil and there's like 2 volumes, it makes no sense. So I like this launching point. The idea is that the Fantastic Four are getting ready to go on a trip. It's supposed to last 4 minutes, and they assemble some people to take their place while they're gone in case something happens. Of course, things go wrong, but what's also found is, who we're assembling for the team. And the real reason why we're going on this trip, of course, the driving force behind the Fantastic Four is Mr. Fantastic, who is dealing with some cellular decay, essentially. His mutation is wearing off, effectively. And so he's decaying. And so he's worried about this, and he's plotted these things to find out certain bits about the cosmic rays that hit them, to understand what's needed to correct the problem. It's a cool idea, and because they're time traveling, they're pulling the Doctor Who, we'll show right back up, and then of course they don't. I think there's a lot of setting here that plays on the family dynamic, and there's a lot of interesting interplay between here and then the first issue of FF, where we see their replacements go. And I think it's telling that as things go, and most of the reception I've heard, people preferred this book to the main Fantastic Four book. And having gone through both, I agree, and I'm going to kind of explain why, because I think Matt Fraction did a lot of really smart things. Then he also kind of missed opportunities and missed the ball with the finale of where he was going in one half and not the other. So things go tits up. The Fantastic Four don't really know it yet, and they're going through their journey. At first, there's kind of the play of everything I've told you about, the secrets, the Invisible Woman, Sue, is kind of keying in. The kids are excited at first, but getting restless, and Ben is starting to not feel so great. And there's a lot of dynamic setting as we're building up. And this continues for a few issues as we go to different worlds. And it feels very interesting because it feels like old school Star Trek via family, which is not a bad way to approach the Fantastic Four, I feel. Obviously, Dan Slott's taking a bit more of a Doctor Who approach. That's just his way. And I'm curious to see if other creators kind of do this kind of a thing. It really felt like old school Star Trek when we get here. And we have this alien who replaces Julius Caesar come in, who becomes a character between these arcs. This is a really interesting idea. One misstep that I'm willing to forgive is there's this weird tie-in to the Age of Ultron, where everybody dies, and I feel like this seeds the worst part of the Fantastic Four run here is the play with the multiverse, and we'll get more there later. This continues for a while until we get to Ben breaking down, and he starts to feel the effects of what is being felt by Mr. Fantastic. So with half, they realize that they're all kind of breaking down. Their time could be coming soon. And the severity of this breaks them down, and everybody kind of has to find a way to forgive Reed because it's the only way forward. Meanwhile, the Human Torch is being treated like a kid, which is this weird thing. Instead of trying to kind of mature Johnny Storm in any way, Fraction's very happy to let him languish with the children. He keeps playing on that idea, which is interesting to just kind of make him a butt, but he also makes him a more interesting character as we continue. So we play with some of that, and then we start dealing with Ben's guilt about the fact that he rigged the lab of Victor Von Doom right before it exploded, feeling like he created Doom. And what we find out is that Doom is inevitable. Some things can't be changed in time. And now that we're doing this multiversal skipping and this time travel skipping, we're kind of playing on the fabric of a failure of what I believe is the multiversal problem, where if you make anything possible and anything able to change at any moment, the consequences of the story, just on their own merits, feel like nothing. Because then you create this big epic to do with some twist on the villains that you have or whatever to have some recognition, and then let the heroes win due to something. It's like a Deus Ex has to come in. It's like good has to win, just because otherwise your story doesn't build itself, but without a kind of hook it doesn't work, which is interesting because I do love like Spider-Verse or a lot of other multiversal stories, but those are about versions of the characters meeting and playing off of each other and disliking and liking certain things that they see reflected of themselves or not of themselves. And that's an interesting like character study and versioning study, which has only been really possible, I feel, with comic book characters. Just the superhero stuff. I mean, with so many takes on Batman, having them bump against each other is interesting. Trying to do that with, Luke Skywalker doesn't really play with too much because there's not much to play with Luke. It's not like there's been so many different versions. That's what I mean there. We have a fun issue where the founding of the nation is kind of up for grabs with Skulls. This is just kind of a fun one-off. And then we kind of start building towards the end. So I'm going to break here with Fantastic Four and go to FF. So the team here finds out that they're going to actually have to work together. And so we have Medusa, we have, I believe it's Teresa, who's Johnny Storm's girlfriend, who's a rock star, who's given a thing suit. So thing ring, do your thing. She's given that. She-Hulk, who has the most history of the team, and then there's Ant-Man, who's leading the team. And what's interesting with that is that Ant-Man is present, and there's kind of a relationship with him and Darla. Did I say Darla? It's Darla. That builds throughout the series. That's kind of Archie-esque in its romance, which is weird because he's dealing with his dead daughter and Doom the entire time. But he's mostly in the background. And so we're mostly dealing with these three female characters and then kind of all the kids. So what throws a complication really quickly is we get future Johnny, who looks like Madman because Michael Allred's drawing it. And as much as I've come to appreciate a lot of Michael Allred's art, he has a few things, like Darla looks a lot like every other female character that he draws. It's very kind of a cartoonesque, where like a female face is like this, a male face is like this, and there's like maybe three male faces, three female faces, and then like you slap on a hairstyle and something that's very like clip art-esque in a way. It works in a way, kind of like how weekday strips in the newspaper worked in a way, but it's a weird take on comicking form. Again, I do appreciate it, but there are some clear limitations in how he goes about it. Him and his all-red team. So, I don't know. Interesting, but having just come off the Silver Surfer especially, some things look too similar at times. So, we get a lot with the Moloids. the Bentley 23, who's the wizard clone, who's the kid who Slot is making a big deal now out of 2. That's going. We play with Darla feeling out of her depth being on a superhero team when she's a rock star, which she should, and that's kind of a fun play to have an underdog character brought up just for this run. And then we get some characters going off the rails. Medusa starts kind of helping Bentley be a supervillain and pushing him a certain way, and the future Human Torch is insane and starts like burning down the city, and they have to stop him, and there's a lot of play there. And in the last issue, all those thing heads, or the Yancey Street gang, giving them all grief, and they're kind of earning their stripes in the place of the greats. And then we get a big kind of female to do where they all kind of have to have it out with each other because none of them particularly seem to like each other, and we kind of move past that crucible in a new team dynamic. It's well done, but it's a little rote, I guess. And then we have a lighter one where we have the characters in a pool situation, and we really get this idea of Medusa mothering kids, and her position is about taking care of as many kids as possible. It is interesting, and her son enters the fold, and that becomes a big deal later. We have the kids getting into some serious mischief, which I think is an interesting idea. They become kind of the antagonist for a while because it keeps things smaller and tighter, which is where Matt Fraction sings. He does a lot better with the interpersonal connections than trying to do these big epic stories in this case. I just feel like things go a bit off the rails, but FF pulls it off. And then with the mothering and academy bit that they've been building through that interpersonal stuff and the kids being a bit antagonistic, the Impossible Man comes in and says, please take my son, who's this kind of bookly character, and he can't relate to him. And so the FF end up taking that character as well. Another fun kind of one-off. More disagreement, and at this point we're building to end Doom, and the FF Future Foundation's big idea is, how do we end Doom, because he's causing all this problem for the world, but really it's Scott Lang pushing because Doom killed his daughter and he wants revenge on a certain level. Through this there are a few moments and lines that reach mostly in the conclusion actually, but I want to talk about it here because each member of the Fantastic Four picks someone to be in the FF. The Thing picks She-Hulk. Makes sense. Sue Richards reaches out to Medusa. That makes sense. Johnny Storm brings in Darla just because it's someone who he knew at the moment. That's just the girl he's sleeping with. And he's like, oh, here's the nearest person. Just being completely irresponsible, which fits the mode of what they're doing with him, but I don't know. It ended up working, but that moment was a little silly. But Mr. Fantastic picks Scott Lang, Ant-Man, despite all of his problems, and Scott Lang is kind of confused because he's like, I'm not you. I am an intelligent person. I am a super scientist and superhero, but I'm not you, and you know I'm dealing with this problem. And Mr. Fantastic is kind of tickled by the moment and the praise, and also he's seeing something in Scott, and people keep saying like, why Ant-Man, and he's like, don't underestimate Scott Lang. He's like, sees something in him, and I think it's related to the fact that Reed is fucking up with his family as well, and there's this kind of weird kinship that Matt Fraction is trying to play on, but because the characters are in different universes for most of the books, this weird connection never really comes in, and it's weird because it feels textually present in a way, but I'm really reaching to make that connection, and it should have been more on the page with the characters having a slight moment near the end. So FF continues. I just want to wrap up FF first because that's how I read it, and it makes more sense. to do that than to actually read them one to one, which is what I was trying to do, and it just was going between two different stories that have a few overlaying parts. It's really only the Julius Caesar character, a couple small moments of the FF like throwing stuff, or the Fantastic Four throwing stuff at the FF that are incidental, the older Johnny's seen in both books, and then the inevitability of Doom, which is really annoying that Doom is the big bad of both books. I love Doom, don't get me wrong, but it's a little much. So here they fight Doom, and they fight Doom, and then they win, and the big win, and you can tell Matt Fraction was sitting on this idea for the entire series, is Ant-Man, Giant Man, grows big, grows small, whatever, but he can also kind of change his mass. So the idea is like there's these two dimensions he plays with, but after researching at the Watcher's table, he learns that there's this third dimension, so he can basically play with just pure density, and so he's able to beat Doom by just being a powerhouse, essentially. It's an interesting idea, but it plays on a lot of like weird lore and references to a bunch of Avengers stuff in the middle of this Fantastic Four B book. And there's other moments like this that I want to get to as well with the Fantastic Four, where Matt Fraction feels free to just play with the entirety of the Marvel Universe, even though he's reaching for stuff he just doesn't need to, nor does he set it up or explain it particularly well. I was only able to kind of follow it because I'm in it to win it at this point with all this stuff, but I think it would put off a lot of readers because it's weird deep lore pulls for your ending moment that don't feel earned because it's based in like a moment of lore that's brought up on the back end of these books with stuff that wasn't relevant to these books until you make the weird lore pull. So there's that. And then the Fantastic Four push forward. Oops, got a issue of the wrong place. So Fantastic Four push forward, and then they end up in this multiversal fight where they're saving all of reality from this mega Doom. So while the FF is fighting Doom of 616, the Fantastic Four are fighting this Doom that is teaming up with the Annihilator and King the Conqueror, and then like merges with all of them and becomes like the ultimate villain in the most Saturday morning cartoon way possible. Which, after playing with all this history and in that like founding fathers issue, is playing on the idea that some of the founding fathers were pushing for abolition but were slave owners themselves, and playing with that contradiction, playing with those kinds of levels of morality to go completely Saturday morning cartoon. It's like, what are we trying for here? Like, where's the through line? And it just feels like it's lost at the end. And so we get this like Doom Covenant coming after them, and then they win, kind of. And I gotta be honest, I had trouble following the why they won. They essentially trap him to the universe he burned out, and the old Johnny goes and he's from that universe too, I guess, and burns out some core that Doom would need to reset, so it's closed. The deal is done, I guess. And then we're at this barbecue, and this cover sucks because it makes it look like it's this big Marvel affair. But we have the FF kind of here, kind of, and it should just be the Fantastic Four and the FF, because that's all of who we care about and all who's in the issue, really. So it's just like they don't understand. I don't know. But in the end, there's this barbecue, and we get the Allred family doing the drawing for that in both issues, which is doubly weird at this point because it's the only part we see Allred art in the Fantastic Four book. I guess there was some Bagley art in the FF book at the beginning, so it's supposed to maybe like bookend it, but it just feels weird. And there's all this idea of the relationship, and we play on all these different things, but again, we don't really have Mr. Fantastic and Scott Lang have more than a few word bubbles against each other when they're kind of at the heart of all this, and then our Johnny that we're left with, as opposed to this Johnny that helps save the multiverse, is just being an irresponsible prick. And Ben's not doesn't seem to have really learned anything from the journey, and She-Hulk's like, well, I don't know what I'm doing next. And it's just kind of like, after working this hard to like help all these kids and do all this, she just feels lost and she's moving on. And it is hard to read because there's all this building and all these character connections being made, and then because Marvel has to hit the reset button, it's like none of what we read mattered. And that's so stupid, because all you have to do is give these characters a connection that will carry on for when they meet again in whatever form that takes. That's all we have to leave with. But it's like this giant breakup. And why? There's no reason for it. It just feels like this was rushed to be finished, and everything we went for was for naught. I'd still recommend checking out these issues if you can't cheaply, digitally, whatever. There's a lot of fun ideas on the journey, on the way, but the endings are not the best, and it's a big reason why I think Matt Fraction is an interesting creator, but often isn't. I don't know. For a while, he was really hot, and I feel like the heat on his name faded after a while. And I believe it's stuff like this where he builds up so much promise, and there's so much in those building up issues that there's some truly excellent stuff and character interactions and playing with the family of the Fantastic Four. There's a couple beats that genuinely carry through and are big, and I've seen carry through to Dan Slott's run. He made a mark with these characters, but then he can do the character work, but it's like he can't do the plotting in a way that's going to be satisfactory, because he doesn't know how to end a story like that. And I give him credit for, I give him credit for not doing a big explosive amount of death, and that old Johnny kind of felt like a character that was doomed to die anyways. But it is like, okay, well, we have to end with a character death, and there you go. And I don't know, it just could have been more. It's a series that's built up, and the ending robs kind of what you read before, because if you're building up to something and it doesn't pay off, the build up loses meaning. So I've been rambling about that part a little too long. So interesting run, but I'm hoping as I continue to read a lot more Fantastic Four, the endings don't pull out like this. Whereas I just read, as you saw, a bunch of Daredevil, and as much as this Zdarsky stuff didn't go, a bunch of the other stuff I read seemed to play through with the character better than that. And as I continue to read through, I just keep thinking the same thing, like, endings matter, and if you don't have a great ending, you should be doing issues and stories that matter along the way, and hopefully it builds to something greater. But if you're trying to build something bigger, you have to know what you're going to. Yeah, I think that's where I want to leave this. So I hope you all have a great one, and I'll be talking something soon. I don't know what I'm reading next at this point. Cheers.